came in and he started up an office in Forest Hills, and that's where where I met him. I was in the war. I was overseas in Iran, and after I was there about 2 years, I received a book from Dr. Baker when Reich's book on character analysis was published. And so at that time I was a Freudian analyst. But of course you can't do analysis on soldiers in the war. So I was a psychiatrist for them. And when I read the first and second chapters of the book, I thought that the first thing I do, if I lived to get back to the United States after the war ended, was to visit him. So I did, and I had an interview with him about a week after I arrived, and he accepted me, and I was very pleased because I couldn't think about doing Freudian analysis any longer, because I realized how useless it was. And I got along very well with Reich. And a short time after, he started to kind of what we can hardly call it treated me for anything. He did treat many of the doctors he had coming to him. But after about, it must have been 2 or 3 months, when I met with him once or twice a week, he said that I was ready to do the treatment. And then I began to find out many things about him as a man. And when he began talking about the orgone, I began to feel very uneasy, because what he was saying and the way he was behaving was quite a change from the way he was when I first met him. And he would have, sometimes he'd have periods of raging. He would scream and yell out loud and scare people to death. And other times he was just fine. He smoked constantly. He bought cigarettes not in a carton with 10 packages, but in a case. And he would take an entire carton of cigarettes and tear the top half of the package, and sit at his desk and pull out one cigarette after another, finishes one, lights another one with that one, throws it away. And all day long that went on, ever since, and all the years that I was with him. I joined him in about 1947. No, it was 46, because I came back from the war in 1945. And then, of course, our friendship broke when he was arrested and sent to jail. But the thing which hurt me a great deal was to see that man gradually becoming more and more sick. And he became paranoid, and he recognized that he was paranoid. Well, there was a book written in which they included him and said that, well, I'll have the name of the book. It was a book written by a psychiatrist in one of the southern states here. Clickley, Clickley, and he included a story of Reich as an example of a typical paranoid type in his book. And the co-workers we all urged him that he should sue for libel. And so we went to see his lawyer, Arthur Garfield Hayes, one of the greatest lawyers in the country. And he discouraged us, but he said if Dr. Reich okayed it, he would sue. But Reich wouldn't okay that. Because, and also Hayes reminded him and us that in a libel suit, almost any evidence could be used against him. Just hearsay evidence. Somebody that doesn't have to tell where the information came from. They could even make it up and say he's crazy or something of that kind. So he didn't say anything, but I brought it up at a meeting, and that's where it was decided that we should that he should sue. And so we went to Hayes, and Hayes told us, gave us that information, and Reich would not say that he will go to see Mr. Hayes. And then it just kept going downhill very rapidly. He began to say that every time these airplanes flew over his land in Maine, that this was these were airplanes which were sent by President Eisenhower to fly over to protect him. But those planes were flying to a military airport, which was up in that area. And he insisted that the president was guarding him and to see that he should not be hurt. And I remember coming to his office to talk with him, and I've forgotten who else was there, but he did not want us to sit close to a window so that anybody looking through the window could see us, because they might shoot us through the window, because he thought that the communists were looking for him to kill him. No, in Rangeley. He rarely went anywhere. Rarely. And about that not going anywhere, he sent me to see Mrs. Roosevelt, the president's wife, to tell her about the orgone energy and Reich's research. He refused to go by himself. He didn't want to go. So he sent me, and I spent about 2 or 3 hours with her, talking, telling her about what I was doing with Reich and what Reich was doing and so on. And then she said, thanked me for coming, and said that she would speak with her friend, Dr. Oppenheimer. And he was a very, very important man in that period. He was somehow involved with all the nuclear things which were going on. And so then she called me after she had spoken to him, and like I said, Eleanor Roosevelt listened carefully and expressed great interest that she would refer the information which we brought to her friend Dr. Oppenheimer. Sometime later, Oppenheimer informed her that he was aware of Reich's orgone energy work and found nothing in it. So he just, I guess he cursed a little bit and went on. He didn't make much response to any of these things. That's why I think that increased what I felt to be the truth about the fact that he was aware that he was becoming sick. And then he began to talk about seeing orgone everywhere. You saw it as specks of light floating in the air, or right in front of him. When a person's eyes are aging, that very often happens. That see those like little electric lights all around. And he began to have those emotional flare-ups, as I said. And I heard him in the building where he was living, and Dr. Raphael and I had set up a clinic for patients who would come there without pay. Yes? Oh.
Go away.
And one night he was standing. There was something was brought in, which one of those two brothers we talked about who died. Yes, the Tropps. Reich said that the clinic needed something, whether it was a table or whatever, and so they got something, and they were bringing it in, and Reich was standing up on an upper floor looking down, and he started screaming, "I give them gold and they send me shit," because he didn't like the thing that they were moving in, and many times I saw the tenderness in him. For instance, I came to his office one evening. He wanted to talk with me alone. And so I came to his office, and his son was then about that big, maybe 3 or 4 years old. And he was sitting on the floor playing with some things which he brought in. And then Wilhelm told him to take his things and go out because he has to talk to me. And the child didn't move. He didn't hear him. He kept right on going. So he very gently bent over, picked him up under the arm, and opened the door and told him to go to mommy. And he locked the door so that he couldn't come back in. Other times he screamed at the child, and he was his wife at that time was with him. Was so often she cried after he insulted her in our presence. Like he always said there was nobody around to help him. Nobody wants to do any of the work. He has to do everything. But she was making the deposit slips for the money to be put into the bank, and then in our presence, Reich looked at one of the slips, and he started screaming at her that she's stupid and she can't do it, and he took it away and said he'll do it over. And he also complained that nobody wants to come and work with him. And many doctors, there were several doctors that I knew who came down from Canada, and they were biochemists, and they were very much interested in what Reich was writing about. And the man came down. Reich wouldn't even see him, sent him away. And the other people, he would talk with them for a few minutes, and he would say no, and they'd go and just send them away. I guess it began in about maybe 1950.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a number of other things, like if anyone could not share Reich's perceptual distortions and see the things he saw, especially orgone everywhere, and that it enveloped the earth, and so that he dismissed them contemptuously,
mm-hmm.
with their saying their character armor prevents them seeing it.
Mm-hmm.
He always used that excuse. And anyone spoke of him, he would characterize them as plague character.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He had actually worked it out to have a lot of things around him, that the way he talked and related to people, that would keep them from getting closer to his illness. And then I wrote, Reich was aware of his manifestations of illness, except where the manifestations related to his exquisitely systematized pattern of delusions.
Mm-hmm.
Like the business of orgone being everywhere, that he saw it as specks of light, and that the blue of the sky was orgone, and that heat radiating from anything is orgone. The most important point I thought that to be made was that his illness did influence everything he wrote and every discovery he made.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I did this
Mm-hmm.
not because I didn't hate him.
Mm-hmm.
I really, I think, had the best relationship with him than any other of his doctors that he had. I remember when he would go out on the roof of his new building to look through his telescopes when he was looking at the stars. And in the winter time in Maine, the temperature after dark could be like 10 or 20 degrees below zero.
Yeah.
And he would go out there with a skimpy little jacket. I thought he was going to freeze to death, so I made up some kind of a reason for sending it to him. It was a holiday or whatever. Give him a present. I bought him a leather jacket with a nice thick lining,
mm-hmm.
and he enjoyed it very much.
Mm-hmm.
Another time, I forgot what the reason was. Maybe it was a birthday. So everybody gave money to buy him a very special kind of record player.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was ridiculous because he had a lot of record players. So I knew that he loved rye bread.
Mm-hmm.
So at that time I had a Studebaker sedan, a very nice large car, and I made a deal with the local bake shop here in New York City to have enough rye breads to fill the entire back of the car. So early in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, I drove to the bake shop, and he put all of the rye bread in. And when Reich saw that, I thought he was going to just die from happiness. He put them all in a refrigerator, a huge freezer, and he never shared it with anyone. Ate it all himself. He must have eaten it for a year. And it was hurting me so much to see very gradually the illness began to become worse, and then become more rapidly. Nobody could discuss anything like that with him. He would have thrown me out.
Yeah.
I didn't want to leave him. I wanted to stay with him, but it's interesting the way I broke off with him. in his foundation, he appointed the various doctors to have real specified action, and he made me one to guard the foundation against ethical behavior by the doctors.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the doctors he was very ill himself. He was a psychiatrist, and he had done some very dreadful things while he was a resident in a mental hospital where he was learning to be a psychiatrist. And I knew him, and everybody knew him, and he was not a nice person. For instance, he got into some kind of a disagreement with one of the other doctors, and not from our group, but one of the doctors for the hospital. And this doctor lived way up in the top floor, the attic of a large building on the grounds of the hospital. And in order to annoy that man, this crazy doctor killed the animal that makes such a terrible smell on a person. Skunk. Killed the skunk and laid the body right on this, so to be under his window, and thought that aroma would go all the way up. That building was about 10 or 12 stories high. So then what happened was that Dr. Reich appointed him to be responsible for the treatment of children, or to the dissemination of any thing that information that parents would want about children, based on orgonomy. So one day, and I knew that he was not fit to do that, because he was sicker than many of the people who we were seeing. And so one day, the mother of a child, a little girl, I think she said she was 7 years old, that the mother was sitting in the waiting room at the doctor's office, and then she heard the child suddenly beginning to scream and yell very frantically. And then what happened was that he told this little girl. The little girl came into the room. He ran over and opened the door and looked out, and then came back to the little girl and said, "Your mother just died out there." Mm-hmm. And this child began to scream and yell, and in fear. And then he let the mother come in. And I was surprised that the mother wasn't getting ready to sue the foundation. But anyway, so I met with Reich and told him about it, and I told him I think that he is not fit to be in charge of that. And so he said, "Well, what would you do if I put him in that position?" So I said, "If you do, I'll leave." So I left. Mm-hmm. I don't know whether he put him in there or not, but I couldn't tolerate that. Mm-hmm. Even if I was not in charge of overseeing ethical behavior from doctors, even if it was just a child I didn't even know or whatever, I would act like that. If a doctor does something which is not ethical, which is outside of the field of good medical practice, it's like, a doctor forcing a woman to have sex, and that things of that kind. That's that kind of ethics. He should have been expelled from the foundation and just keep working on his own in orgonomy without having anything to say about how the foundation should function and who should do what and so on. The information which I was given was that if I thought any doctor did anything which is unethical, that I should report it to the foundation and to Reich. So I did that, and then he asked me. He was apparently planning to put him on the board of the foundation, and so he asked what would I do if he would put this doctor on the board. So I told him I would resign. When I resigned from the foundation, Dr. Baker and Dr. Raphael, who were my two best friends in the group, just stopped talking to me. They thought that I was just throwing everything away, and I told them that I'm continuing to do the character analysis, and I did it for 22 years after that. But it was about a little more than that before Dr. Baker and Dr. Raphael would even talk to me. But about 2 years ago, Dr. Raphael called to tell us about a patient he was sending me, and then I called him, and we met, and it was a very, very happy meeting for both of us because we were very good friends. And I started Dr. Raphael off in the practice of the Reichian treatment. We met, and then he didn't speak very much about his relationship with Reich and mine, but he was upset with me when Reich came back from I forget whether it was New Mexico or one of the Arizona, and they made the claim that he made rain there. And when Dr. Raphael told me that, I said, but I asked him, does he know anything about the weather in Arizona? And he said, no, he just knows that it was a hot place and so on. So I said, well, the time of the year when Reich took his equipment down to Arizona, that was the time that the rain came. That was the rainy season in Arizona. And the rainy season in Arizona comes every year, and it's incredible. Have you driven through Arizona on your way here? Yeah. Did you see signs about being careful when you go down to when the road dips sometimes? Sure, then it looks like the road is straight, and you just drive right into that water, and it upsets the car and kills people. I mean, I'm just saying that because to let you know how heavy the rainfall is during that season. So I didn't say that what Reich was doing was nonsense because he didn't make the rain. I just reminded him that nobody had said anything about that was not the season to go down to Arizona to make rain. Yes, and that's what broke it off, broke our relationship off. And the first things he said when we met, this was 2 years ago, said he wondered why we hadn't been in touch with each other sooner. Well, it's a sad thing that in none of the literature in psychiatry has Reich's name in it. You know, they sort of cannibalized his work. The psychoanalyst took part of it, and the psychologist took part of it, and everybody. They just rewrote what he had written, never writing to say that it is from Reich. Never find his name in the reference. I started when I was in. When I finished my residency training in psychiatry by 1942. And then I joined the Army, and I did psychiatric work for the Army. I was for the entire Iran stations of the United States Army. It was under what?
Gulf Command.
Yes, the Persian Gulf Command. I was the psychiatrist for them. And I did things like examine soldiers who were being tried for murder, and did things of that kind. But I had done a little bit of Freudian analysis before I went into the Army, and then, but I could see that it wasn't going in any direction. So. I think I mentioned to you that as soon as I saw Dr. Reich's book, which Dr. Baker had sent to me, that I decided I would go in that direction, and I was very, very pleased from the treatment which I learned from him. See, I think Reich and I had a very special kind of relationship, because he said that. In his memory, that he thinks that I was the least neurotic doctor he ever met. So he didn't keep me on the. That made a lot of the other doctors very, very angry, because he told it to them also. Something about Raphael. Raphael and I were assigned by Reich to run that clinic, because he was saying that the sitting in the accumulator is the best treatment for the pains which women have in the week before their period comes. So we had women coming in, and none of them really improved. None of them. And then Reich also was saying that the sitting in the accumulator can prevent or cure cancer in women's breasts. But what he wasn't taking into consideration was the fact that in the week before the period comes, a woman's breasts become larger, they become painful in some of them. If they have cystic substances in the brain, in the breast, it's painful. But as soon as the period begins, and it's about the first or second day after the period begins, the pain leaves the breast and so on. But so, based on that, he examined women when they are in that period when their breasts were enlarged because their period was coming. He didn't take that into consideration in making a diagnosis. So he'd make a diagnosis of cancer of the breast, which was ridiculous. And you could not argue with him. I mean, nobody can argue with him, but nobody wanted to argue with him, just tell him that they don't believe that this is true, because we saw it Raphael saw it also again and again, that as soon as the period comes, the women's breasts stop aching, and everything is better again. But then he thought that sitting in the accumulator is what did it. And Dr. Raphael agreed with me about that. But another interesting thing was about what I told you earlier, that he didn't go anywhere. He felt that he was finding something which will cure cancer. So he told us, I've forgotten who else came. I think Dr. Baker came. I don't know whether Raphael did, but anyway, there were a few of us who Reich contacted at that time the AEC. That was the group which was overseeing the nuclear things which were happening. So Reich sent us to tell them about his work with mice and cancer, and he armed us with very few details about what he was talking about, and he concealed other things in his research. And we felt like fools when the serious group of biologists, physicists, atomic scientists, etc., asked us specific questions, like of the pathology, to which we had no reply. Well, we all said we don't know. And then finally they realized that we weren't prepared to come. So they asked, why didn't Reich by himself come? And we had no answer for that either. It's just like he did not want to go alone to see, or even with us, he didn't want to go. He just didn't want to go. He wanted us to do it. And in both instances, we sat there like fools at that AEC. They were really very pleased that we came. They thought that they were going to get some very important information, but they got nothing. We didn't know that he did any research with mice. We knew what was going on in his laboratory, but I don't know whether he was doing any research with mice. And like, he never went anywhere. He always stayed in Rangeley. The only thing he did in Rangeley outside of his laboratory, he liked the Western movies, so he went to the movies frequently. But I saw his schizophrenic withdrawal kept him from going anywhere, and not his great preoccupation with his discoveries. This was rationalization, which he always used, that he doesn't have time to go anywhere because he's busy working. Here's another interesting episode. He began talking about motor force and orgone energy. The motor was plugged to a variac, which was plugged into an electrical socket. And then he was saying and telling about this research that the motor ran from orgone energy, didn't require any electrical thing. So Reich was furious when Dr. Handelman honestly and innocently related to Reich that he had told some doctors about motor force and orgone energy. Reich screamed at him for revealing that the motor was plugged into the electrical line. That also made us feel very unhappy. He saw and felt orgone energy everywhere. He said it was the vital life force, and he compared it to God and his omnipotence. later in prison he embraced organized religion. Well, there really at no time was really any time to ask them about these questions. But the thing about the best and the most that I could say about the orgone, the accumulator, it does something, because I had an infection in my eyelids, which I got during the war, and it was with me for many years. Even now, all of my lashes fell out and so on, and from time to time the lids would swell up and feel. So one day when I was in the laboratory with Reich, and he looked at my eyes and he said, "What's wrong?" So I told him, and he said, "Well, go sit in the accumulator." So I went into the accumulator and I sat there for about a half hour. When I came out, my eyes were so swollen I could hardly open them. Mm-hmm. They hurt. Then another time, when they were not swollen, I tried it again with the accumulator I had at home in my. I had an accumulator right on the outside, the other side of my office, mm-hmm. and I had some people sitting in it, but it didn't do much for anybody. But I tried it a number of other times, and every time I got into it, it did something to my eyes. So from that I perceive that it has something. It's doing something, but I don't know. I could not see that it would cure cancer or cure any kind of real illness.
War doch zusammen mit Dr. Henning an einer Klinik.
He's still alive, isn't he? Yes, he's with another doctor who was one who was with us with Reich, Handelman, and I forgot the name of the other, but they had their office in Greenwich Village. Mm-hmm. I think I'll look them up and see if he's still living or if he's still there or not. Mm-hmm.
Wir haben so eine Telefonnummer gesucht.
A discouraging thing which came up was about that his illness did influence everything he wrote, and that every one of his, quote, discoveries he made. Mm-hmm. In later years, he revised his earlier writings to put it in the perspective of his newer discoveries. Mm-hmm. In other words, he changed what he said in the first time. In later years, his illness was increasing. He would drive away or not accept anyone who was not overwhelmed by him and who could see him as a human. Mm-hmm. And as I told you earlier, I think that my relationship with him was the most human one that he had with anyone else. Mm-hmm. Rather than worship his genius or look upon him as a god, he deplored people. He says that he deplored people who hung on his coattails. Mm-hmm. Yet he would not tolerate anyone to be a co-worker if they were not stuck neurotically to his coattails. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Always complained that he had no one to whom any work could be delegated, yet he wouldn't allow anyone to help. He didn't even trust his wife.
Yes, sir.
With all of that, I admired him. Oh, I saw him once a week for about maybe four or 5 months. And he began to send patients to me very early, very soon. Well, he felt that the learning I had of Freudian analysis was a reasonably good basis on which to change over to the character analysis. Yes, and you see, another thing that Reich said was that the treatment is much quicker than Freudian analysis.
Yeah.
He said none of those long-term treatments of like anything from 5 to 10 or 20 years.
Yeah.
But I don't think any of us were able to say that we helped a person sufficiently so that they got something out of the treatment in less than 2 or 3 years. Well, I think that's good. It's rational, and it works. See, again, he had this impulsiveness about discoveries. The moment he thought of something, it became a huge discovery, and he proclaimed that he was first. He always had to be first in everything. He had a mania about being first, ahead of Freud, Einstein, etc., even Christ. And he wrote a little booklet that he would save the world against nuclear attack, and that he made great excitement about having discovered the antidote to nuclear fallout or nuclear attack. That was to sit in the accumulator. Since orgone energy was the universal force and was all healing and all benevolent, then it would save the world. And he immediately printed a booklet proclaiming this and began to distribute it. Well, that's characteristic of the schizophrenic illness, is the degeneration of the person's character. That's the character of the illness, that they get into a point where they can't tell the difference between reality and unreality.
Wie würde er denn als Psychiater das beurteilen, Schizophrenie? Würde er sagen, es ist eine Anlage oder es ist eine Sache, die durch Realität hervorgeht?
The judge before the trial pleaded with Mrs. Reich to not insist on having the trial because her husband was a very sick man, and she talked with Wilhelm about it, and I guess he must have gotten upset, but she came back and said her husband is not a sick man, and he wants to be his own lawyer. So he was the lawyer for himself, and that was a disaster. No, I think most of the people in whom the illness develops are people who were born from a family where there must have been this illness. So it goes from generation to generation. And it's there was that man Kleckerli, who wrote the book. He never met with Reich, but he must have followed whatever came up that he could, information that he could get, or whatever appeared in newspapers or whatever. Or I don't know. I don't know enough about them, or what they've, how much information they've accumulated in their literature.
Yeah.
No, the two people with whom I had the closest relationship was Dr. Baker, because I was his assistant when I was learning psychiatry. He was head of the women's department in a mental hospital, and I had my residency there, so I was there for 4 years, and so we had a very, fairly long relationship. The people were so ready for Reich's treatment. Not with the orgonomy, but with the character analysis. People who were with the Freudians and not getting anywhere. And in a very short time, I was so busy with patients that I urged Raphael to finish up his residency and start an office and start practicing. So I told him I would send him patients. So I sent him a great many patients that got him started, and then he got patients from them and so on. No, I could not find a close relationship between what happened on the couch with in the person's body and the literature, which has been gathering very rapidly on the orgone energy. I do, but he refers to it as a new thing that's flowing through the body, which he called orgone energy.
What is it?
I don't see the connection which the others saw. I think the others saw the connection because Reich said so. Fairly nice, yes. But then the other doctor who was in the office with him brought his wife to see me, and but that was the only connection we had. And we lived in for 11 years. I lived in Greenwich Village, and he did also. So we were just several blocks apart. But I didn't know that they were there, and they didn't know that I was there. I thought we might have met each other on the street sometime, but it didn't happen. The way it happened was that the doctor who was with him called to see if he could make an appointment to come to the office with his wife. But the training was I don't know where this came from, something which I copied, that treatment and training physicians therapeutically did not do very much. Because I think that part of the reason for that was that there was such a demand for treatment in those years that Reich had a person on this couch maybe for 4 or 5 or 6 months, or even less than that, and then said that they would be ready. There was an interesting thing which he did about, of course, we paid for our visits to him for what he called the treatment. And then a few years after my treatment and whoever else was having the treatment at that time, he raised the fee from $30 a visit to $50 an hour, and he made it retroactive. So I had to repay him the money, which for the time I had with him about 3 or 4 years ago. Even much later than that. Let's see, that was in 1957. I bought a Mercedes for $5,000. That was the top of the list. $5,000, the best one. Now you know what you pay for a Mercedes, the top of the list, about $70,000. So that's how good. Sure. No, there were so many likable things about him, but I could see the way he was really destroying himself with the cigarettes. And then all the doctors except me kept saying it can't be a heart problem. You know, God doesn't get heart problems. And I said that anybody who smoked that many cigarettes can't possibly avoid having a heart attack. And so they said that he should not go into a hospital. He doesn't have to go into a hospital because he coughs all the time. I sat in his office many times for hours, and no, they weren't just lying in the ashtray. You see, they really kind of tried to make everything that they saw that was wrong, to minimize it. That doesn't matter, this doesn't matter, this is not too much or whatever. But that's what finally destroyed him, physically. I never saw him drink. I really can't recall. No, the first contact I had with Reich was when I returned from military service. I had a job. I was asked by the military to set up a clinic for emotional illness in the soldiers who were just returning from the army. So I did that for 8 months, and in the evening I would have a few patients for treatment. And then I began to treat more and more people with Reich's therapy. And then I got so busy that after 8 months, I gave up the job and began to practice all day. And so many of these patients were people who had spent thousands and thousands of dollars and hours on a couch with Freudian doctors who were doing Freudian analysis, and they were so happy to come and change their therapy, because they did begin to improve much more rapidly. It is, yes, sure. They're doing what they call cognitive therapy and all kinds of therapy, and then there are probably more non-medical people who are doing all these therapies. Social workers are doing it, and psychologists.
Mich würde interessieren, wie hat ihr das verarbeitet? War das also mit Bedauern quasi, dass das so schwierig wurde getragen?
I went up there. We used to go when we had the foundation. I think it was at least once a month, and that was a long trip. to Rangeley. And so we did it all through the year, in the winter also, when it was very dangerous driving to and from Maine. I enjoyed it a great deal until things began to fall apart. Now he was a sick man. Before that, he sent letters. In fact, I saved the letter which he sent congratulating me on the birth of a child at my when my daughter was born. He called her a citizen of the world.
Was hat er nachgemacht?
You know, I felt sort of isolated, but I got accustomed to it. And now I've added a lot of things to my practice of medicine, with nutrition and treating without drugs wherever possible, by the use of vitamins and minerals, and then amino acids. Have you read anything about the research in amino acids? It's remarkable, absolutely remarkable, because here are these substances which are like a vitamin. They're not a medication, they're not a drug, but they're marvelous medication because it's been found that, for instance, certain vitamins, when they get into the body, into the bloodstream, they turn into an into the amino acids, and then the amino acids turn into a substance which affects the brain, and but in a good way. And so we can do so much now without drugs. For people, for instance, who have very high anxiety or panic attacks, but now the amino acids are much more in use, but vitamins still remain important. And there's a great deal of good research going on in that area. I also treat children, the children who have learning disabilities, and they're very hyperactive. These children are running around all the time, and in school they disrupt the entire class because they don't sit down, they don't listen to what the teacher says and anything. And so now we have an amino acid which is called tryptophan. And Mother called me on the phone this morning to tell me how pleased she was that she had to take her child with her to some kind of a ceremony which is going to be held for his sister. But she felt that she couldn't take him because he would just destroy the whole thing with all his hyperactivity. So I told her to get the 200 milligram tablet of the tryptophan and give it to him and see what happens. So she gave it to him, and about a half hour after he took it, everything stopped, and he would sit down, and he was quiet, and he'd just be like a normal child would behave. No side effects because they're not a drug. The only thing which can make a side effect has to be a chemical which goes to the brain and does something bad up there. But this goes to the brain, and it improves the action of the brain. I always thought to myself that if Reich had lived long enough, he would have come in the same direction.
Yeah.
Because it's very vaguely, but I remembered something that he said about vitamins once, just one time, and it was a positive thing that he said. And I felt that, after he died and everything settled down, that it was such a disaster, because I'm sure that if his illness did not destroy him, that he would have come in this direction.
Wie versteht ihr das denn mit dem Vitamin? Ist das eine Kompensation quasi? Oder würde er sagen, es ist natürlicher Verlust, der gestimmt wird?
No. In some cases, with the physical problem, that is true, that the body is missing or has the deficiency of some of the very important vitamins and minerals. And then these amino acids help to adjust any disturbances in brain function. Amino acids are in the body. The body makes them from protein. It's interesting that if one eats proteins and then takes the amino acid, that combination is not good. So every second is about 10,000 chemical reactions going on in the body. Literally that much, because Dr. Linus Pauling, who knows more about all of these things than anybody else who was ever alive, and the research in amino acids is going on very strongly in Germany also, because I've been finding a lot of articles which were produced in Germany about the amino acids. But the cost of vitamins in Germany is crazy. They're very expensive. They shouldn't be. No, they don't talk about Reich as a human. Yes, an interesting thing I did. Whenever I met somebody who had been to see Reich, and then Reich referred them to me as a patient, and I asked them, did you like Dr. Reich? They said, yes, very much. I asked about, how tall do you think he is? Every one of them said that he's very tall. They just kind of overwhelmed. Yes. In addition to the tragedy of Reich's death and the end of his life is the death of Dr. Wolf. Want my opinion about what happened?
Yeah, sure.
I think he committed suicide. He was heartbroken when Reich dismissed him, because there was the man who what they wrote about him in the psychiatric literature about Wolf was that his translation of Reich's work is as great a work as the work itself, because he made it so easy to understand it, put it into English. And it was for some silly reason that he said something he said at a meeting or didn't say at a meeting, and Reich said, "You're out, go, leave." And so he went down and lived in New Mexico. And then I heard that he had, they said that he had gone, driven to Mexico or whatever, and something happened, But then, so I decided to go and visit with him when I was on my way to across the country with my wife and children. And he was alcoholic, and I think that he committed suicide. Mm-hmm. And afterward, the information that came was that he couldn't have done that because he did this and that and the other thing, but nobody ever said about what he died from. Mm-hmm. But he was found dead. But he was crying during the time that we were there. He was so happy to see us. Mm-hmm. He really isolated himself.
Hatte Gespräche mit Dr. Wolf?
No, I didn't. I think I should have, but I didn't. Yeah. I liked him a great deal, and he taught us a lot about the therapy on the couch. Mm-hmm. And we came to his office, or it was his home, in his apartment on 2nd Avenue, and once a week. Mm-hmm. For a long time. Mm-hmm. And again, to say that I said that the accumulator certainly does something, because every time I came there, I got a headache. Mm-hmm. And a few of the other doctors got headaches, and I couldn't imagine why, until I began to realize that every day, I think we went there on the same day of the week, every week, and that on that day, or that evening, and the day after, had severe headache. Mm-hmm. And then one day, before he came in, I went over to the kitchen, and standing behind the door was an accumulator. Mm-hmm. So it must have been what the accumulator was putting out into the atmosphere.
Okay. So. Versoffen und verkifft. Hä? Kannst du mal diese Stelle filmen, wo die Autos hier rüberfahren, damit man mal sieht, wie die Straßenverhältnisse in New York sind. Da alle Porsche und BMW-Fahrer in der tiefen Achse. Warte mal, bis sie hier rüberfahren. Der wurde hier zusammengeräumt, weil sie anscheinend noch nicht zugemacht haben. Mhm.